Hi everyone, Eric Crafton here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this album from DJ Sabrina, the Teenage DJ, Charmed. This is a new LP from UK electronic music producer DJ Sabrina, the Teenage DJ, which, yes, is in fact a cheeky reference to the cultural touchstone that is Sabrina the Teenage Witch, a fictional character whose roots goes back to the Archie comics universe, from there spawning numerous spin-offs through comics, cartoons, television shows, movies. However, given the nostalgic references peppered throughout this project, it's pretty clear DJ Sabrina wants listeners to be thinking back to the days of Melissa Joan Hart playing lead in the television series that put the franchise on the map. There are a lot of beats and samples and aesthetics here that call back to old school synth pop, 90s house anthems, 2000s new disco, Europop, and dance pop. There are numerous cuts here that feel almost future funk in spirit too. The record is really a 1-2 punch of nostalgia and euphoria. You could even say some portions of it really have me under its spell, which seems to be the case for many others too, as there has been an outpouring of passionate fans coming out of the Bandcamp scene for this record, coming out of the more online sectors of the electronic music scene too. The presentation of this thing alone makes its appeal a no-brainer in my view. The cover art that looks like some bad promotional imagery for a terrible sitcom, the very hilarious artist moniker. It's exactly the type of meme-centric irony that hooks in weirdo music listeners before you've even pressed play. Then I also imagine younger listeners could get hooked into this too, imagining this bygone era as being really exotic or even ideal, when in actuality it was toxic as fuck. If you ever get access to a time machine, do not go back. Now, I should also mention at this point, this record is 3 hours long, 3 entire hours, and the material here isn't organized or staggered in any way. It's just 3 straight hours of mostly plunderphonic and nostalgic house jams. The grooves keep going and going and going, sometimes pushing the track lengths here to their limit. The last 2 songs on this thing together account for 27 whole minutes on this record. And while dance music does have a history of going long, I have to imagine there must be some kind of artistic intent here beyond that for DJ Sabrina that would drive this desire to immerse the listener so deeply in these sounds. I mean, Sabrina's other projects aren't exactly trim either, and while that may be an artistic choice that many have enjoyed on this record, I personally can't help but feel like drawing things out this far has exposed some pretty glaring flaws. For one, DJ Sabrina does attempt some forays into synth pop that don't go over nearly as well as the straight house cuts. Ocean, for example, does feature some very stiff backing instrumentation, a completely soulless vocal. It really could have been left on the cutting room floor. On top of that, there are several other cuts as well that feature very dodgy vocal samples and placements. Too Long Looking Back To is certainly an example. The singing on this one is barely there. It's completely ineffectual. No idea why it's even here. Then there's the multitude of dialogue snippets placed throughout this record too, which for many is most likely a selling point, but to me, they do get stale after a while and mostly distract from the overall lack of progression and variation on these tracks and this album. Sometimes they're even overbearing, like in the case of Right Now, which for the most part is this sort of trippy and very euphoric house anthem, but it's also laced with these very hushed, close, in-your-face ASMR-style vocals that feel almost at odds with the pumping dance beats. Then to get back to the progressions in general, they do leave a lot to be desired, especially as DJ Sabrina tends to use the same tricks again and again and again. One of the most obvious of which is slowly along the progression of these tracks, just upping the volume of everything to get the intensity up, eventually driving the track to a place where everything sounds like this sloshing, whooshing wall of near white noise, which I think can be a legitimate way of intensifying things and keeping people moving on the dance floor, but when this same trick is applied again and again and again and again over the course of a 3-hour record, it does get a little tedious. It's like seeing the same formula executed over and over and over, and the only varying factors are some of the vocal samples and melodic progressions, which, if they're impeccable enough, can make for a standout, as there are multiple highlights across the runtime of this project. The opening track next to me feels like someone's taken all of my memories of 90s commercial music and also sitcom themes and mashed them together into this absolutely blissful house anthem, just fireworks going off, backed with driving kicks, topped with soulful sax. It's fantastic. Then Charmed honestly feels like one for the catwalk. Bright vocal samples, shimmering chords presented with so much volume, so much power. Then Still Cool with its quick tempo and peppy bass and saxophone. Sounds like I'm listening to the intro music to some kind of network morning show, or maybe even some house remodeling series where the host is really sassy. But again, if you were to turn that kind of thing into a house banger, with all of these increasingly strange and noisy sound effects, I would say this track even qualifies potentially as being hypnagogic house. And then things move into a rustic direction with the track Not Your Fault, where those familiar driving house kicks find themselves underneath some moody and melancholy singer-songwriter type loops. The final leg of the record does leave a lot to be desired, though. Admittedly, I found myself in a place where I was just mindlessly bobbing my head to whatever was going on and not really paying attention with or engaging with what I was listening to. Not that I didn't go back and re-listen, I did. It's just that all of these sounds got really tiresome after 3 entire hours. The closer is one of the most legitimately killer moments on the record, though. Real sense of finality with these relaxing pianos and heavenly jangly synth bits and vocal samples. It's quite a rush of bright, feel-good, electric energy rushing up and down my body. But having said all that, I do walk away from this project generally intrigued by DJ Sabrina, but still somewhat torn on the somewhat mixed, very massive, and kind of redundant batch of tracks I have been handed here. I'm feeling a light to decent 6 on this one. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like, please subscribe, and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you could check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, DJ Sabrina, forever.